Hello, welcome everyone to this presentation on neurological basis of ego states. My objective is to familiarize you with some of the neurological terms, some of the basic neurological structures, and how they are associated with the concept of ego states. So this is the current understanding of neurophysiology that I am exposing here. Let's understand the brain first. The brain is plastic. What does it mean to say plastic? It's not regular plastic that we mean here. It means it's moldable. And our experiences molds the brain. Or in other words, the brain is not a once and forever finished organ. It's continuously being molded. So this is a picture on the structure of the brain. You can see the colorful picture. It's generally compared to the size of a coconut, shape of a walnut. And the gross structural regions that are identified in brain are the cortex, the right brain, left brain, the lower brain, the midbrain, the higher brains, or the connections, the memorizing part of the brain, the ethical part of the brain. Sometimes they are also identified as emotional regions of the brain, logical regions of the brain, instinctual parts of the brain. So people refer to different parts of the brain in the structural way and depending on how those structural regions function. The nerve system has a basic unit called neurons. They are the nerve cells. So these nerve cells are more than 100 billion in number in the body. And each of these cells can make more than 10,000 connections. It is estimated that altogether all these cells can make more than 1,000,000 connections in a second. And with all these connections, the brain is capable of more than 100 trillion operations per second. So which is beyond our understanding, or in a common way, what is the speed and rate at which communication happens in the brain. We are not aware of it. We are only aware of a small portion of it. This is something very good for us to keep in our memory. This is a diagrammatic representation of the neuron with the cell body and the dendrites close to it, and also an axon which is extending from the cell body as a longer structure. At the end of the axon, you have axon terminals with branches. So this axon is covered with Schwann cells. It is named after Schwann, who discovered it. And they are kind of insulating for the nerve function. So in every nerve, it is more axons with insulation that passes through the nerves. Cells are concentrated in brain and certain regions called ganglions in different parts of the body. So inside the visceral system, inside the peripheral system, there are ganglions. I am going to show you pictures of that. They are coming. So the nerve cells or the gray matter are concentrated in the brain. And the white matter in the brain is basically Schwann cells and myelination, which covers the neuronal axons within the brain and makes the conduction very effective and managed very well. And this gray matter has the cell nuclei in them. So it's a very complicated way in which it is organized. But these terms, it's good to be familiar for us. This is a diagrammatic picture which illustrates how nerves communicate between each other. So you can see the axon end of one nerve cell in junction with the dendritic end of the other nerve cell. And you can see a junction with a expanded picture of it. So you can see small dots in that expanded picture which represent the chemicals that transmit the information from one nerve to the other. So you also have learned that nervous transmission happens through electrical impulse. That's true. But when the electrical impulse reaches the nerve ending, they convert into chemical impulses, and chemicals are secreted. And this chemical which is received by the next cell translates the meaning of the communication. And there are many chemicals which intervene in this process. So all these descriptions sound very simple. They sound very simple, but they happen so fast in the brain, and very often we are not aware of it. That's what we need to keep in our mind when we learn all these micro details. You may be familiar with the word neuronal wiring. Neuronal wiring is comparable to electrical wiring in our buildings. So a system of nerves are present in all different parts of our body, which are mainly axons, and their cell bodies are concentrated in either the brain or the ganglia in different parts of the body. And at the tip of all these nerves, there are receptors. So they are all connected together. So this is called wiring. Neurons wire together. Now let's see how the brain develops. When a baby is born, the baby has all the required neurons till the end of his life. Though a few more neurons are being produced later on in life, but they are very small numbers. And these nerve cells are not insulated when the baby is born. So the insulation is developing after the baby is born. That is why the child has an increase in head size or brain size after birth, even though all the required neurons are already present. In other words, the baby's brain is like a non-insulated bundle of wires when the baby is born. But by the time the baby becomes 2 years, the insulation is complete, and baby learns, or baby's brain learns to conduct properly. In practical terms, what it means is by around 2 years, a child is capable of understanding what the stimuli means. Till that time, the child may be confused with what the meaning is. So this is a very important thing for us to remember as parents, teachers, and people who care for babies. By the age of 2 years, every child is capable of understanding if we communicate to them in a proper way and knowing that they understand what we are saying. The nervous system is fully developed. Their head size is almost like that of adults, and they are capable of communicating meaningfully with others if we take the time and effort to communicate with them in a proper way. Basic architecture developed with proper food, sleep, and stimulation. But genes play a very important role in the temperament of the person. And it's not just by the genes, it's an interaction with the environment though. That is why the environment is also very important. So the development of the brain or the development of the personality can be understood as a very integrated process. What is genetic and what is environmental works together and develops our temperaments, our personality the way we know it. How do the environment and experience mold the brain? This is an animated diagram showing how it happens. So experience leads to neuronal firing. Neuronal firing leads to neurons wiring together, and over time they rewire when similar experience repeatedly happen. So as you can see here, some experience like parents talking about the child's activity and then referring back to those in later on life and maybe remembering them, maybe other supportive measures, they all cause the neurons to rewire. So the learning process is not just once, It happens over time through these repeated networking processes. It's very important for us to remember that, because as caregivers and as parents, everything we do to the child is making an impression. There is a neuronal wiring that happens. That's why in the beginning I said brain is moldable. The brain is not just a finished product. Everything that the brain experiences is making impressions or changes in the brain. And how is the brain connected to the rest of the body? Brain is connected to every other part of the body through nerves. And ganglions are the relay centers in between. Brain and skin develop together in the early stage of life. So the skin and the sense organs have these receptors, and the nerves or the axon bundles travel to the ganglion and the brain cells, and they work like an electrical network, connecting, passing information to and fro. The other important part of the brain network is how we behave or act. So the sensation we learned, how the receptors take the information from the receptors through the nerves to the brain cells, and how the network takes it to the brain. And the brain works as a unit and make a decision on how to respond to the sensation that came. So that is executed through the muscular part of our body. So that includes our face, our hands, limbs. So what we call as body language happens through this motor response. So there is another set of nerves for it, that is called the motor nerves. Often these nerves are paired together and travel together, even though they have separate functions. Sometimes there are very clearly nerves which do only motor function. Some nerves do only sensory function, but that's very rare. Most nerves have a combination of sensory and motor nerves in them. This is a highly technical information that I'm sharing here. It may not be important for everyone every day, but you may be referring to these, hearing these words. That's why I'm giving it here. So these are certain classical nomenclature that we use to different parts of the nervous system. Central nervous system, peripheral nervous system, somatic nervous system, autonomic nervous system, ganglions, parasympathetic nervous system, sympathetic nervous system, all these terms. You can take time and read through the list I have given. And there is more to it. If you are interested, you can search for each of them and understand how these are connected. Today information is available for everybody. Earlier these informations were privileged informations for neurophysiologists and doctors. But now you all can search on the internet and get more information about each of these, how they are connected and how they function together. So this is the CNS, and the colored part that you see is the CNS. What is below is the PNS, what the peripheral part of the body, sorry, the SNS, the peripheral part of the body. So this, the upper part is the CNS related to the brain region, and that related to the body is called the somatic nervous system. The sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system together forms the autonomic nervous system. So they innervate the visceral organs. So as the name implies, they are called the autonomic nervous system because they take care or regulate the functions of our body, which happens without our conscious awareness. For example, the food we eat is digested by the intestine system. We don't get to know about it. Our hearts beat without our control over it. And our nervous system works together. We have not much control over it. All the mental health processes do help us to learn a little bit of mastery over these things, but in general human beings have no control over or mastery over their visceral functions like digestion, excretion, heart function, breathing, etc. Breathing is the only function which has some motor aspect to it or voluntary aspect to it. But even if that is not exercised, automatically we breathe. So it is kind of automatic function. That is why that nervous system is called autonomic nervous system. So here you are seeing all the sympathetic nervous innervations. So you can see this colored region, these ganglions. These are the ganglions in the sympathetic nervous system. So the nerves originate here. They have a connection through the spine to the brain and to the peripheral organs through the nerves on the other side. The next one is that of parasympathetic nervous system. So this looks similar for you, but you can see that the ganglions are in different places. Earlier the ganglions were around the middle region of the spinal cord. Here the ganglions are in the brain related regions and the tip of the spine. And also inside different organs there are ganglions. So this is the parasympathetic nervous system. This is a picture showing the functional difference between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. As you can see, in the parasympathetic nervous system, always the nerve messages are passed through the same chemical called the acetylcholine. Whereas in the sympathetic nervous system, when it comes to the receptor ends or at the tip of the nerves, it is norepinephrine. So these technical terms you need not remember, but you need to know that there is a physical difference in the way the two systems work. Then there's something called gut nervous system. Till recently we were not very aware of its importance, but today we know about its importance so much that it is almost called the gut brain. So you can see there are multiple layers of nervous connections in this, and this colored region is where you see the ganglions in the gut nervous system. Inside the gut there are ganglions, and what happens inside the intestine where the food breaks down and there is a lot of bacteria, they secrete a lot of chemicals. Those chemicals have a stake in the way the nerves function and the messages are transmitted to the brain. We still are not fully aware of all the details of it, but we know it's a very significant aspect of how the brain functions. So what does it mean to say the brain is moldable? The moldability of the brain is called neuroplasticity. There are two components to the neuroplasticity. One is with the brain's capability of making new connections even after it's fully developed or in the adult stage also. And the other kind of moldability function is through the new nerve cells that are formed in adult life. So that is called neurogenesis. And the new connections can also be destroyed and new connections can be made. So there is continuous process of connection forming. Old connections may be destroyed and new connections may be formed. So again, imagine how dynamic the neurological functioning inside the brain is. So this is the physiological basis of the dynamic nature of our life. Here we are trying to learn what are the different brain regions that are connected with different parts of the mind. Especially in TA, we say that there is a PAC model of the mind or personality. So there are different regions associated with that. The oldest part of the brain is called the archicortex, from which developed the oldest part of the mind called the archaeopsyche. And the cortex of the brain is considered the newest part of the brain or the neocortex, and from that region develops the neopsyche. And the exterior psyche is developing from the exterior cortex or the middle part of the brain where the environmental influences are making impressions or networking. So that's what this picture is trying to illustrate. So here you can see what is the oldest part of the brain, the archicortex, and the middle part of the brain, which is where the exteriocyte develops, and the neocortex or the cortical region of the brain, from where the adult part of the personality develop. So this is showing how the dynamics of how all these different regions interact, and through these interactions the real personality in real life manifests. You can see the child part in us, the adult part in us, and the parent part in us. So each of them are named as child ego state, adult ego state, parent ego state. And you can see also the Malayalam names there: Shishubhavam, Pakvabhavam, Pidurubhavam. So this is the classical transactional analysis depiction of ego states. Because we were a child, we have the child ego state. Because we grew up, we have the adult ego state. And when we grew up, we have also incorporated whatever was happening in our environment, and that becomes our parent or the external ego state. So the archaeopsych is the child, the neopsych is the adult which develops newly, and the exteriopsych is the influence from outside, which is colloquially called as the parent ego state. So thank you very much for listening to this. I'm not putting in any exercise here, but I'm inviting you to go back and listen to this whenever you need clarity on what is the connection between the concept of ego states that TA teaches and the neurological understanding currently about the brain and how the brain network works. Byrne, when he formulated the theory, neuroscience was not as much developed as today, but still, whatever evidence he had about nervous system connections, he used, and based on that knowledge, he has made these theorizations. If you go back to his book on the TA in psychotherapy, you can see how he connected with his time understanding of brain through Penfield's work. So thank you again. Please go back and listen to the video and be thorough with your awareness about the learning process.